this video, we're going to discuss how to create good line work with acrylic paints. The first thing I want to talk about is that there's a variety of brushes that you can use to create lines, but some are better for basic line work and others are used for more specialty techniques. Out of these brushes, my favorite brush is the script liner, but that is not always what is best for the beginner to use because it is much longer than a regular liner brush, as you can see, and therefore it's going to have a lot more give than what a beginner would be used to, let's say if they were using a pencil or a pen. I find that beginners like to use as short of hair as possible because they feel like they have more control over it. But in all honesty, when you have these short hairs, you have to know how to load a brush properly because you have such small brush length that you can only really load the tip, otherwise it's going to go into the ferrule. And you really want to keep it out of the ferrule, otherwise it will ruin your brush. Some of the best brushes for beginners to begin with is just your average 1/2 inch liner brush. This one is in the Silver Ultra Mini script, and it has a fatter handle on it, and so it gives you a lot of control when you're working and doing your line work. This one is also a regular liner brush, but the handle is a little bit thinner. So again, they have similar length of hair, but the handles are different. Also, this is a Golden Natural, and you can see the color is just a little bit different. This has a combination Teflon and natural hair in it, and you're ready. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you know that this brand is my favorite out of the silver lines. And what I like is with the natural hairs in it, it does maintain a more even moisture consistency than just a regular Teflon brush. Another reason why I like the Golden Natural liners is because I tend to mix my paint with my brushes, and that causes my hairs to splay out like this. But what's really neat is they have interlocked hairs, and so when I put it in water and bring it back, you can see that it completely reshapes itself. And that's what you're looking for, whether it's a silver brush or another brush manufacturer. You want to have a liner brush that has interlocked hairs so it will reshape itself. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to mix paint. I've mixed some that's a little bit too thin and mixed some that's a little bit too thick. And as you can see, the one that's way too thin is running all over the place. And so what I do when I mix my paint, I do use a palette knife to begin with. And I'm trying to get more of a heavy cream consistency. I know that many people refer to the consistency as ink-like. This one that's a little bit too runny is more of an ink-like consistency. What I want is I want it to be more like a cream, and I think that's what I have now. But I always come back and test it with my brush, and I should have blotted my brush to begin with. And so what I want to do is I want to see how it's pulling out of my brush. It's almost there. I think it's just a little bit too thick. So I'm going to thin it a little bit more. Just a little bit. And it might have been that it was just on this outside edge that it was too thick. So what I want to show you is that this just pulls so nice, and I can get nice little lines even on my palette paper with this. When I go into the thick, you can see it comes out very, very heavy, and it's dragging. I don't know if you can see how it's skipping on here, but it's not wanting to flow out of the brush, and that's because there's not enough water combined with the paint for it to do that. So if you see that you're getting heavy strokes like this or lines that drag, and it just doesn't have a nice even consistency to it, it could be that your paint is too thick. Then when you come over and your paint is too watery, it's just it's like it's out of control. It goes everywhere. And it's also very transparent. And so while it appears here that I have control over it, what's going to happen is it's going to be somewhat transparent, and you can see that. And if you want a transparent application, this would be fine. But sometimes it will also puddle on you, and I have the benefit of having an amazing brush that maintains a consistent moisture in it. And so even though it's a little bit too watery, I'm able to control it because of my brush. But as this dries, you can see how it's just fading away. And it's because there was too much moisture in it. Then also, you can see how this is dragging. And this is the one that's too thick. That's just not wanting to flow out on my brush at all. Once I know that I have a good paint consistency, I want to make sure I do an entire puddle at a time, especially if I'm doing an animal of some sort, or I'm going to do a lot of lining. You don't want to have to keep individually taking your water and mixing it over by your paint puddle, because number one, you're going to have a different consistency every time you do that. And then also you're going to have to spend a lot more time mixing your paint and thinning it. So by doing a big puddle, I know that I already have what I need. So when I come over here, I am having nice opaque lines. They're flowing from my brush. You can see how nice and thin they are. That's what I'm looking for with line work. So the second key to good line work is loading your brush properly. You never want to load it and so that there's a drip or a blob on the end, or so that it makes it fatter than what it should be. I always blot my brush, and so that you can see my brush is the same shape it was as if it just had water in it. So that's how you load your brush properly. Then my brush position, I always lay it back almost like I have a pencil or a pen in my hand, because I'm not pulling a stroke. When you're pulling a stroke, there would be a reason why you would want to have your brush up in this position. But when I'm just making general lines, I know that I can come over and lay my brush down and make it comfortable for me. And then I know that I can make really nice lines. Now, the amount of pressure that you use is also important. So you can see how thin my lines are when I use very little pressure. But when I'm using a lot of pressure, you can see how thick they become. So you can see that you can control the width of your line work by how much pressure you're putting in the brush. So a really good practice is to first make a very, very thin line, and then try to make it a little bit thicker, and a little bit thicker yet. And you can keep practicing that, so you know that you can control the amount of pressure and get different size lines with one different brush. Now there's another popular method of pulling a line, and one is starting with very little. Well, you can see I did not blot my brush, so that was very, very hard and came in too heavy. So what you can do is start with a thin line, add pressure, and then come back up to your point. That's thin, thick, thin. And that's, again, just learning different brush controls that you can do with a liner brush. Now sometimes when I'm base coating, what I like to do is I like to begin with a little bit of line work so that my object does not grow. So in the case of pulling a line, you can start and you can try to maintain a consistent line when you pull it in one stroke. But I find it easier just to pull little teeny individual lines as I go, especially if I'm following an edge. When I'm curving around a line, I always like to think in letters, and in this case I would use a letter C, because I find doing a circular line is very difficult to do. So I'd start like that, and then I'd turn my brush over, and I would do another C to match it. Once everything would be lined, I would then come in and base coat the object. That way your individual element of the design will not grow on you. Another brush that somewhat falls within a liner category would be a round brush. And this is always much fatter, but it does come to a point just like a liner does. And I like this for various reasons, but obviously it's to pull fatter lines. And I can do that, or I can pull very thin lines. Again, it has to do with your brush pressure. And in that case, after I was done with that, I don't know if you noticed, I tipped my brush on its side. Because as I pulled down with the number 3 round, it turns into a flat brush. So if I put it on the chisel edge, I can pull a nice thin line with that. Now in the case of the snowman, it had a line of line work in it. And you can see there's very thin lines, there's thicker lines. And so I either would change the amount of pressure, like this was a thin, thick, thin line. Oh, over here for the eyes, I outlined it and then came and filled it in. The stripes on the hat, I used a number 3 round and just pulled the individual lines. And then here I have some curving lines because I wanted to create the illusion of dimension even with my lines. And then on the outside edge, I'm just simply used more pressure as I used my liner brush. Over here, outlining these letters, I used very little pressure so that I would create very, very, very thin lines. The next brushes I'm going to talk about is brushes that you can create multiple lines with. And for that I use the Filbert Grass Comb by Silverbrush. There's many comb and rake brushes out there. I prefer the Filbert because it makes softer lines. So I make sure that I test my paint just like I do with when I'm using a liner brush. And then when I come over here, obviously, it's the same elements are important with this brush as they are with a regular liner brush, where I want to use a very light pressure. So you could pull and make a Santa beard, you can make hair with this. There's many things. But in the case of this bird, I began the robin with this brush. And I started the texture with it. And then what I do is I continue moving forward until I build up lots of layers. I build up all the layers and then I finally will pull in just little individual strokes using the smaller grass comb brush. And then I even pulled all of the little hairs here with this brush instead of a liner brush. And if I needed to for some little individual lines, I could come in and use the liner. But for the most part, I can create all this texture just using the 3/8 and the 1/8 inch grass combs. There are various ways to create fur. With the bird, what I did is I pretty much pulled the hairs straight, and occasionally I would cross over them. And this works really well as I pull them, and I can continue down. Obviously, the longer I pull the hairs, the different type of hair I'm creating. Now, I'm also very popular for creating teddy bears, and I know many of you are interested in how I create that fur. Well, you can begin by using the smaller grass comb. And you can see how short these hairs are. And I'm doing more of a little X as I'm filling these in. Again, if I were to pull these longer, I would have a different type of bear. It would be a very long-haired bear. Where in this case, I'm just making little cross-hatching lines. However, no matter what I do with my bears, I always come in and use my liner brush and fill in. So in the case of this teddy bear, I started the rabbit fur lines by using a grass comb brush. But you have to see these little individual lines here. It's very important that the brush is loaded properly and that you're using the right amount of pressure, because when you pull the brush out, you're going to have these little teeny, just soft lines. That's what really convinces the eye that this is soft and fuzzy. On the teddy bear, this short little fur, there's little teeny individual lines here. And those little lines also can convince the eye that this is very fuzzy. But the whole body of the bear was built first with the grass comb, and then I came in with my liner brush and pulled little teeny hairs to fill it in. So let's say I overload my brush and I'm going to try to come in and do the same type of texture. What happens is, you can see how heavy they are. This is what I want to achieve, but yet this is what's happening. And the difference is how the student is loading the brush, their paint consistency, and how much pressure they're putting on the brush. So remember, you have to use a nice light touch when you're making these little individual lines. If I come in with too much pressure, you see the difference in the line work. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have learned how to create good line work and the importance of creating the correct paint consistency, using the proper brush position, and how much pressure you use when creating lines. If you are a beginner painter, you'll probably need to practice creating these lines with different types of brushes before you determine which brush will work best for you. Also, I hope you are enjoying the series on acrylic paintings. Please subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up so I know that you liked the video. Also, leave a comment or a question below, and I will try to answer you on a timely basis. I hope to see you in my next videos. Until then, may painting always bring you joy.